Hello there everyone, welcome back to Press for Truth TV. Today is Tuesday, July 17th, 2012, and late last night we had a very tragic event that transpired here in Toronto. There was a rather large shooting that transpired in the east end of the city in Scarborough, where 22 people have been injured, 19 people were shot. Some of the other injuries came from people being trampled in the mayhem after this shootout occurred, and 2 people have been confirmed dead. And of the 19 victims who were shot, one of whom happens to be a 22-month-old baby. So this indeed is an incredibly tragic event. It is the biggest case of gun violence in the history of the city of Toronto. It's certainly something I'm not used to seeing. People all over Canada are shocked at this moment. It's just something that we as Canadians are simply not used to. Just generally, these sorts of things don't happen around here. So it's a terrible, terrible event, and my thoughts and prayers go out to the victims' family members at this time. And something that I can perceive coming out of this in the coming days and weeks is not only tighter restrictions on how we as Canadians would go about obtaining a permit to own a firearm, but eventually a complete banning of firearms in general and a disarmament of the population. And this is actually plays into a larger agenda that is currently being dished out on a global scale, as the United Nations has just announced a UN Global Arms Treaty that seeks to do just that, disarm the people of the world. Here's an article out recently from Paul Joseph Watson. UN gun grab follows State Department plan. The UN Arms Trade Treaty that is being identified by observers as a flagrant threat to the Second Amendment, and which Barack Obama is determined to sign, has its roots in a 1961 State Department memorandum which explains how the United Nations will oversee complete disarmament of the American people under the ruse of preventing war. The UN Arms Treaty has caused so much controversy because it outlines a plan to target all types of conventional weapons, notably including small arms and light weapons. Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, also warns that the agreement is trying to act as though this is really just a treaty about international arms trade between nation states, but there is no doubt that the real agenda here is domestic firearm control. A letter sent last month by 130 Republican House members to President Obama argued that the treaty should be rejected because it infringes on the fundamental individual right to keep and bear arms. The letter adds that the UN's actions to date indicate that the ATT is likely to pose significant threats to our national security, foreign policy, and economic interests, as well as our constitutional rights. Using the rhetoric of the threat posed by terrorists, insurgents, and international crime syndicates, the UN is busy trying to imply that all weapons are somehow involved in illegal activity on a global scale and should therefore be controlled and regulated by a global authority. And here we are once again with talk of a global governing body to oversee these things. And we're getting to the point now where it's almost arguable to say that perhaps this New World Order, one world government system is here, and we're starting to see the implications of that. That certainly is starting to look like the case. It's just a matter of realizing that this is going on right now, right before our very noses. And the article goes on here. This is precisely the same language used in a 1961 U.S. State Department briefing which outlined a long-term agenda to carry out a program for general and complete disarmament in a peaceful world. Invoking the threat of nuclear warfare, the document spells out a plan to create a United Nations Peace Force that would enforce the peace as the disarmament process proceeds. While the document initially focuses on scrapping nuclear weapons, it later makes it clear that the only groups allowed to own weapons of any kind would be governing authorities for the purposes of maintaining internal order, and the UN peacekeeping force itself, which would require agreed manpower. The manufacture of armaments would be prohibited except for those of agreed types and quantities to be used by the UN peace force and those required to maintain internal order. All other armaments would be destroyed or converted to peaceful purposes, states the document. While the memorandum outlines a broader mandate to destroy national sovereignty, eviscerate national armies, and institute the UN as the planet's supreme authority with a world army, the document serves as a stark reminder that the plan for the United Nations to oversee the abolition of the Second Amendment has been in the works for decades. As Bell points out in his Forbes article, the threat of the Obama administration relying on a UN treaty to do what successive administrations have tried but failed to accomplish, taking a huge bite out of the Second Amendment, is by no means far-fetched. After all, a plethora of UN treaties and international agreements have already stripped the United States of its sovereignty and its power to decide its own laws. The power to authorize US involvement in wars and conflicts has now been almost completely stripped from Congress and handed to the United Nations. And in fact, we pointed that out in a video report that we put together called Press for Truth Presents the New World Order of the 21st Century, where we show how Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta basically announced that the United States military no longer seeks permission from Congress in order to engage in combat overseas, and that it now just needs international permissions, basically bypassing Congress and going directly to the UN and NATO. And I'll put a link to that video in the description in case you haven't seen it, so you can see that for yourself. Following Barack Obama's arrogant rebuff of Congress in seeking approval to strike Libya, during which he churlishly remarked, "I don't even have to get the constitutional question," Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta affirmed that the U.S. now requires international permission before deciding on its military policy. Other Obama-endorsed UN power grabs like the Law of the Sea Treaty, as well as Agenda 21 and Sustainable Development, are also serving to decimate national sovereignty and remain almost completely under the radar. You only need to look at the European Union, which now crafts around 50% of the laws made in member states like Britain, to understand how unelected global institutions can and have dictated policy on a national level. The U.S. Arms Trade Treaty presents an existential threat to the gun rights of American citizens and should be rejected for what it is. Yet another attempt by the Obama administration in the aftermath of the Fast and Furious scandal to abolish the Second Amendment by stealth. And in fact, that's another point that I brought up in a vlog a little while ago, in a video I made about the Fast and Furious scandal, where I point out the fact that it's actually the governments who are the ones supplying arms to these gangs. And it was the CIA who was caught supplying weapons to the Mexican drug cartels, which ended up causing all the havoc and chaos that we've seen there recently. And this all comes under the Obama administration. So in one instance, they're arming the the gangs. And so, as I stated in that video, the disarmament of firearms on a global scale will first begin with gangs and violent criminals, but eventually will lead towards farmers and law-abiding citizens who just wish to protect themselves against oppressive governments and intruders. So once again, it's an incredibly tragic event that took place here in Toronto last night, but at the same time, it's important that we don't overreact and hand over too much power to the government to take care of this situation for us, especially if it comes in the form of a global arms treaty being dictated by the United Nations. So when you have a chance today, check out the links in the description. I'll put a link to the article there, and also to the 2 videos that I mentioned in this video. So when you get a chance, you can check those out. And that is all for today, everyone. Thank you for tuning in once again, and I will see you all right back here tomorrow. Take care.